Yesterday, we bombed Iraq. Today, our commander-in-chief is vacationing in Martha's Vineyard. Is the world descending into complete chaos under Barack Obama's watch? With me now, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN and Fox News contributor John Bolton. Good evening, Ambassador. Your reaction to the president's handling and response to ISIS up to this point?
Well, I think it's completely inadequate, and I think it's a further piece of evidence that the president's just not paying attention and hasn't been paying attention. In his remarks announcing the U.S. return to activity in Iraq, the president said he had two objectives. One, protect the American personnel in Erbil, the capital of the Kurdish regional authority, and second, to deliver humanitarian assistance to the Yazidis and presumably other refugees from ISIS. These are very limited objectives, and they're not being performed adequately, at least as of now, particularly the humanitarian assistance. There's still no evidence there are people on the ground distributing it once it falls out of the sky. It almost guarantees women, children, elderly, ill people won't get it. But the real point, I think, is that it doesn't fit into any kind of coherent plan, at least not anything that the president has announced, to deal with the threat that ISIS poses, first in Syria and Iraq, but almost certainly in short order thereafter in Western Europe and the United States. So the reaction so far, it's certainly better than nothing, but it's completely inadequate.
Well, you know, it certainly, as you say, is better than something, but, you know, we have been speaking to sources who tell us that they haven't seen any food, they haven't seen anything come to them, and it's got to be somewhat haphazard. I mean, dropping these food and this humanitarian aid, you know, these people are in the mountains. I mean, it can't be...
No, exactly. Look, we went through this in 1991 after the first Persian Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein, still in power, began to persecute the Kurds who fled into the mountains in northern Iraq and into Turkey. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, no food, no water, no medicine, no shelter, no sanitary facilities. When you drop supplies from airplanes, number one, you've got no control what's going to happen to the people on the ground. It could crush them when they land. Number two, without an orderly system of distribution, as I say, the people who most need the assistance are not going to get it. And the president seems to have been motivated by the fleeing of the Yazidis, of a minority ethnic and religious sect. And I'm sure their situation is tragic, 50,000 of them perhaps in the mountains. But we know that since ISIS moved into Iraq, over 200,000, 300,000 Christians and other minorities have also fled.
So why now, Ambassador? Why now? Explain this.
You know, I can't really, because it's just more evidence of the lack of coherent thinking. That it's, as in the case of Libya, he's moved at the last minute to do something that turns out not to be sufficient, and then, as you say, goes on vacation and stops paying attention to it. I believe the president doesn't govern anymore. I think this is all about politics, and that may be the explanation for why now.
Well, but okay, so let's talk about ISIS coming to the United States. Do you believe that some of them are already here? I mean, we just, you know, Eric Stakelbeck, Brigitte Gabriel talking about how they are actually recruiting online, that there are disaffected Americans, youth who are just used to being online and say, hey, why not? I'll join them.
Well, all over the world, I think it's going on. We've got news reports today that elements of the al-Qaeda franchise, if you will, are beginning to disaffiliate from al-Qaeda and take up with the Islamic State. And this is another piece of evidence that that the threat of terrorism continues to grow. Just because it doesn't have a coherent organizational chart like the government or General Motors doesn't mean that it's not growing. And I think that does mean recruitment in the West. And I think it also means, as a number of people have observed, that alumni, veterans of ISIS or other terrorist groups can certainly come back to the U.S. or Western Europe. The real danger, I think, that we should be focusing on in Iraq is not letting ISIS control territory for a sustained period of time where it can set up a state, set up a base of operations, and conduct terrorist operations not on a lone wolf or one-off basis, but much more coherently, much more well-planned. The danger exists now. If they can get control of a piece of territory, it's only going to get much worse.
Yes. All right. Ambassador John Bolton, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
And tonight, growing outrage over